Faithful Remnant. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Some folks coming in the room and some folks joining us online. It's good to be gathering on this Sunday morning for some more conversation about being fully alive and about the 7 deadly sins and how those intersect. I'm Catherine Bush, part of the clergy team here at Calvary with Scott Walters, our rector. And we started last week taking a look at this book by Elizabeth Oldfield called Fully Alive, Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times. I think there's a little bait and switch when she titled her book and subtitled it that way, because it is a book about the 7 deadly sins, y'all. And she didn't say that anywhere until you're a couple paragraphs in.
It's a friendly bait and a friendly switch.
It is friendly. It is with good intent. It's with good intent. So we talked about wrath last week. We talked about polarization last week. We talked about peacemaking last week. This week, since hopefully we need less kind of time setting the scene and introducing you to her, we're going to try to tackle not one but 2 sins, 2 ways of living fully. So we're going to start our conversation with the word avarice, which is similar to greed. It's a little different. We'll talk about those nuances as we go. And the move that she wants us to make is from what she calls stuffication. Stuffication, like suffocation, like your stuff, right? To, where are we heading? We're heading to gratitude. So the kind of the problem that we have is avarice. The modern name for that is stuffication. And we're trying to get to gratitude. And I'll just say at the beginning, she starts off with a real simple story. I think it's her grandmother maybe, or it's an older matriarch in her family, who is just delighted from the tip of her head to her toes to get a new pair of socks. And she tells the story of this woman who just lives with this sense of joy, even as she's frugal. Right? She actually calls it joyful frugality, which is the difference for Elizabeth, who thinks when you start talking about avarice and wanting stuff and having less stuff, and that she moves into this kind of like, oh, that sounds austere, that sounds hard, that sounds joyless. But she's really trying to set us up from the very beginning that there's a way of living with what you have and an enoughness and a joy in it, so that when you get socks for Christmas, you are pumped, right? So that's where we're headed, is how do we capture that sense of joy and delight in the simple things that we do have and that we do need. So.
And I think what I love about that story is that it's, I think there's also a way of being, and I resemble this sometimes, obsessed with stuff with frugality. Like, how much of my consciousness am I going to get over to, like, I can't pay full price for that. I'm going to spend 4 hours and not think about the person who made the thing. And there are different ways of being obsessed with the thing I don't have. But then the story about the socks is not about being. It's about appreciating material things. It's not anti-material thing. It's actually having space in my life and a frame of mind in which I say, I can see the thing in front of me and enjoy the thing. Because sometimes there's a especially if we talk about 7 deadly sins, there's a really grim version that says. So I hadn't thought about this. When Alden was little, I've told this in a sermon years ago, but we had this book that he read called Casey the Greedy Young Cowboy. Yeah, for real. And so we'd read this story, and it's this whole thing about he has all this stuff, and he goes off to the circus, and I don't know, he runs away, and I can't remember all of it, but Alden one time, Ardell's driving in the car, and from his car seat in the back, he said, Mom, you know that story about the Casey the Greedy Young Cowboy? Well, it might be fun for you, but it's not very fun for me. And another time that feels related to me, he had a very stereotypical gendered comment when he said, Mom, because we were ambivalent about weapons as toys and tried to figure out how do we teach our kids and whatnot. And he goes, Mom, sometimes I wish I were a girl because then maybe I wouldn't like weapons so much. So in a child like this, I think we carry this guilt and shame that feels like the thing is evil rather than how do I have a relationship with things, beauty, as material ways of connecting with people, with one another, with my own life that's healthy and things are in their place. And it feels like the gratitude as the long game kind of breaks me out of, I wish I didn't like that so much. I'd be a better person if I just didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and down the rabbit trail of children's books that teach you unexpected lessons. So there was a book, we were the grateful recipients of the Dolly Parton library books that came every month for 5 years. It's the most amazing thing that ever happened to children in reading. Some of the books were better than others. And one of the books was The Minosaur. I don't know if there are other moms in the room who got the Minosaur book. And there's a Minosaur, and he's a dinosaur, and he all mine, and he takes all the toys, and he won't share, and everything is his, all this kind of stuff. And then at the end, there's this little bitty turn where things get a little better, and he learns the lesson or whatever. But the takeaway in our house was, how loud can you say mine? They just was like one of those books where 95% is the problem. And 5% at the end was like, and then they were friends, And my kids did not latch onto that. They latched onto, how loudly can we stomp around like a dinosaur and say, mine, mine, mine? So sometimes we do get fixated on the problem more than what is the invitation and what is the opportunity. And so, yeah. Little children's literature sidebar there. That's free today.
Yeah, and we're going to do this anytime you all are ready to, got a thought that comes up with you, kid's book, whatever, an idea, just jump in, and we'll pause from time to time, but don't be shy. Last week we weren't sure if we should just like ramble on for a little bit and then have a Q&A at the end, but it seemed to work fine for the folks online to do it. So okay, this is interesting to me to go from children's books to John Maynard Keynes. Y'all, did you take econ classes? But he's a great 20th century economist who said a couple of things that are interesting to her. One is that he said, and I didn't remember this from my econ classes, was that he said, eventually the world and the economy will be such that there will be enough prosperity in the 20th century so that we won't need greed, but we're going to need greed a little bit longer. That was Keynes' thing. He's also the guy who's more famous for this, to say, I think by the end of the 20th century we'll have a 15-hour work week. That was Keynes, and he's a great he's an important economist and thinker in the way modern economies work. But what's interesting to me is what actually happened is that there didn't seem to be greed or a sense of lack can be a posture, can be a driving force in my life no matter what. And Keynes kind of missed that about the human species, I think, that wherever I am, if there's somebody else with something, it doesn't even have to be more. It can just be other. Yeah. There's a way of being dissatisfied with what's in front of me and wishing for something else, which is not a great frame of mind to be in, and yet it makes a lot of sense that when Keynes is like, you know what though? That's what makes the world go round. If everybody gets satisfied with what they have, you're not going to go shopping enough, and consumer demand won't quite be what, So it's an interesting conversation when she starts to talk about structural.
Right, because so he says avarice or greed must be our god a little longer. This is actually the Keynes quote. Like, it's a god, and we are going to need it, but then eventually we won't, and then we can go back, he says, to this better way of living, this non-sinful. I mean, if it's a deadly sin, like he's saying, well, we'll just sin a little bit longer until we get the economy straight, and then we won't. And she talks about a number, and I never took an economics class, so all of this is kind of fresh news for me. But I have, there's an author who wrote a book, I think in the 90s, about affluenza. Do you guys remember hearing that? This idea that we kind of like catch the flu of wanting more. And there is I think what Keynes maybe missed and what other people are starting to figure out is that what we do is we get some stuff and then we get used to that and then we reset. So now this is the baseline. And so now I want more than that. And now, oh, look, now this is the baseline. And now, oh, but that's a cute dress, and I have 3 or 17 or whatever. But now, oh, that one's cute. Like, we just keep resetting what's the norm. And so then we keep adding and we keep adding. And we don't, as he thought we might, go back and reset to where we don't have that feeling anymore, that insatiable need for the next thing.
Yeah. And this is not an anti-suburb statement. But there's this interesting thing about sprawl in cities that's been measured, that when the sprawl itself happens, I make a calculation that I would like a bigger yard, a double garage, the things that understandably I would like, and so a city starts to sprawl. But what they've started to measure is that if I just go out there and don't have an actual place, and I've increased my commute by an hour, that my house becomes my house psychologically very quickly. It becomes the new normal, and I'm just used to it. And the kind of the difference in joy, my commute is still my commute. And so they do psychological studies about the way our minds reset to a new normal, and then we don't get the same kind of joy. I'm not saying, so there's a whole conversation about suburbs themselves now that let's make a place here so that there's actually place to be, and so it's not anti that, but the impulse that can move us toward more, what is it, law of diminishing returns in a way, is what it is what we don't realize. It feels related to that. She didn't say that, but
no, but I think it's there. And one of the moves that then she wants us to make is we could talk about economic theory all day, or some people could. I've just told you everything I know. But then she wants to talk theologically and about us as humans living in this world. And one of the things that she wants to point out is, why am I doing that? Why do I want more? Why, when the baseline is reset, am I not like, okay, I still want more? And that there's this kind of trying to fill different holes and gaps in our lives. So way back a long time ago, people were talking about the God-sized hole that we try to fill with other things, right? That nothing else is as big as God, so nothing else fills the God-shaped hole in me. But I'm going to try real hard with the next thing or the new thing or the replaced thing or the better thing or the thing that you have that I didn't know I wanted until I saw you and you look so cute, and now I would like that too, please. That we're trying to kind of stuff and fill all these holes. And one of the other places that we're trying to stuff and block away is that feeling of, I might not be here forever, right? So we have this natural kind of fear about the end of our lives and what are we worth and all of these things. And that's, she actually calls it a terror management strategy. So in order to keep the terror at bay, I will go shopping, right? And we think about what happened when COVID started. We all figured out how to go shopping online. And right, and we're just there's this existential problem out there, and I'm on Amazon, right? And there's something about us that's we've got a hole, we've got a gap, we've got an emptiness, and we're just trying to fill it with anything we can grab hold of so often. There's a gospel lesson about that, about man who has a lot of stuff, but that he needs to build new silos and new barns because now he's got more stuff and he keeps building new silos and new barns, bigger barns. And the story goes, the way that Jesus tells us, is that God comes along and says, you fool, tonight, this might be the end. And you've just spent all your time just making bigger barns. I was telling Scott before we got started, there's a preacher named Fred Craddock, not related to our Craddock friend, who's this beautiful Southern drawl. And when he preaches on this story, it's not, you fool, tonight. It's, you fool, tonight. And it's just you can hear the ache in God's voice that we just missed the point again, right? We just,
Okay, there's a great, and then I want to hear from these people if they've got strategies. There's this prayer of Stanley Hauerwas's I love, Because that fear of time, in a way, we only have so much, and time can... So parts of this is scarcity. I think if it had a little bit more stuff or a little different stuff, like that scarcity mindset, I've got to go get some, that ends up not working. That's what she's like. She's not talking about you're evil if you like nice stuff. She's like, it doesn't work. This is a prayer by Stanley Hauerwas that he used to pray in his classes from time to time, and it's about time. End of all our beginnings, Lord of time, who alone makes time a gift. Remind us we are creatures with a beginning. We confess we often forget we are your timeful creatures. We fear the forgetfulness our death beckons. We're driven frantically to work, thinking we can ensure we will not be forgotten, ensure our own place in time. How silly we must look to you, ants building anthills to no purpose. Help us take joy and rest in your time, Eucharistic time, a time redeemed through Jesus' resurrection, that we can rest easy in our dying. You have given us all the time in the world. May we take pleasure in it. Amen. There's a lot in that, we could have a whole class on that prayer, I think, but that you have given us all the time in the world doesn't mean that my time will never run out. It means that time is a gift, and look, it's all here, and if I can see it as a gift instead of a scarce resource that I've got to fill today, and it's a really different way of being, and Hauerwas says there's a way of being in time and trusting God, not in trivial ways to say nothing will go bad, to go wrong during this time on earth, but trusting and saying, all of this time's a gift. Let's take pleasure in it, in it.
So as she wants us to kind of make this move then to, okay, wait, this is the problem. I think we're all pretty clear on it. It looks different in different people's lives. People struggle with different pieces of it. But she offers us a way forward, a way to kind of shed this particular deadly sin away. And she starts with what she calls kind of just taking the medicine, as acknowledging, like, hey, this is a problem. And it's a problem to God, and it's a problem so much so that, I mean, you may have heard there's a lot of talk about, like, how often different topics come up in the Bible, right? And sex actually doesn't come up that much, right? Well, prayer, as you might expect, comes up 500 times in the Bible. It's a goodly number for prayer in the Bible. Money comes up 2,000 times in the Bible, right? Like that many more times than prayer, y'all. This is clearly something that we need to pay attention to, and that people have always also struggled with. And she talks about it, acknowledging that it can be a useful tool. No one here is suggesting, that it's not a useful tool. She says it's a terrible master. So it's the difference between, am I using this to good, or am I being used by it? Am I being controlled by it, and everything is, managed the flip way, kind of.
Yeah. They're not 2,000 verses that say money's bad.
Right.
They explore it as a parable.
Right.
Sometimes they say it's dangerous. And I do feel like, I think money's fascinating, actually. Fort Knox is not a thing anymore, right? The gold standard's long ago. Money actually depends on our trust. Now, there's an interesting way of looking at, I think that could be a really rich way of thinking about community and about how gifts are exchanged in a society and what it allows. It allows some of us to do particular things. But it feels a little bit to me like insurance. If insurance is, in my imagination, a way not to need you, not to need my neighbors, to be an individual, and I'm like to be responsible, I'm fully insured, and therefore I am impervious to risk and all the things that make for actually then I don't think that's a healthy relationship with it. I think if I do see insurance as, if I pay a little bit, if something really goes wrong in Kathy's life, we could all together cover it. And it wouldn't be that, it could be a communal effort. My dad used to talk about this. He's like, if we see insurance as that, it's the same thing, But it can really work differently if I'm trying to store up a way of protection against risk for me and myself. Then I'm in this scarcity mindset rather than this, I think there's enough care. Let's figure out a mechanism to make that happen. I think there's enough gift in the world. How do we find a way that actually allows people to have access to it? They're not simple answers. There's not a simple economic answer. I don't know if you noticed. Communism didn't go well in the 20th century. So it's not like there's just a lever to pull. But I feel like the lessons are subtler and more real to life and about the imagination and community.
And I think that piece of how it can keep us, it could connect us if we pooled our resources, if we saw that actually there's enough money, there's enough food, if we just shared it a little better, right? And one of the things, but again, she talks about that instead, I tend to think like, how can I build up my defenses so that well, if I have a big enough pile, then I won't need to ask you for help, right? And that just separates us, because actually I do need people. I do, and to learn to rely on our neighbors and to trust and to have relationship. One of the things that she keeps coming back to is one of the things that makes all these sins deadly is how they kill relationships, kill connection. That's the damage happens there, right? So that I'm disconnected from my relationships in the world, from my actual needs and wants, from other people. And certainly there's a whole piece of this that's about social inequality and cheap labor and the stuffification that requires that other people are working in, dastardly condition. I mean, so again, there's a play out all the way through there. So then what do? It's not easy. One of the first things that she offers is this idea of gratitude, and she's real quick to say gratitude is not cool, right? That we want to be like, have this like bored ennui, like, I don't need, but actually, if it's uncool to be grateful, then eventually she's ready. She's very, very truthful about her own struggles and also her own stuff and the things that she likes. But paying attention so that we don't forget the house that we worked so hard for, or to pay attention to the things that we have, to honor the socks that we got for Christmas. Back to that grandmother story, that the way that we think about things and pay attention to things can start to shift our headspace around this constant scraping feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be very curious. Like, do y'all have strategies, whether you acknowledge them or not, that bring you out of a mindset of scarcity and into a sense of gratitude? Maybe a practice sounds like a high-minded, but are there things that work for you where you feel like you're awake to your life and help?
I do think it's one of the glories of old age, if there is such a thing. I don't want anything anymore, and it's incredibly liberating. I mean, there's not room for anything more in my house, and I'm trying. My New Year's resolution was not to buy even underwear. I mean, I have enough to last until I'm out of here. And I think it's wonderfully liberating, but I wish I could tell you it was intentional, but it's just something. The other thing I will say is, as you get older, people tend to give you tea towels, tote bags, and socks. Does anybody need any socks? I have plenty.
Yeah, they do.
There's some folks down here who need the tote bags and the socks, actually. I know. Yes, that's true. That's true. Other reactions and thoughts? I mean, again, this acknowledgement that your house is full, and instead of like the guy in the story from the Bible of like, well, I'll just build a bigger house and a bigger barn, like, well, I'll just stop.
And I wouldn't dismiss, too, just staying attentive to your life over time as bringing a gift of things being less urgent. I mean, I think not to set that aside as like, as I'm older, I'm realizing priorities are different, and what I want is different, and I don't think that's needs to be a rebuke to someone younger. It could be reminding that every day I'm in this world, if I can have a more healthy relationship, it can lose grip over time.
Many years ago, when we were having healing service on Thursday, they were using a service that stressed more than enough. And that really impressed me, and I decided, I've got more than enough. Anytime something comes up, if I don't have it, somebody else comes and helps me with it. And I have lived that way ever since. That's been probably 20, 25 years ago. And I've probably got more stuff I know I do than I need. But I don't feel any scarcity at all.
So here's what's interesting to me about that phrase is that more than enough is the definition of gratitude.
Yes, very grateful.
Like if I feel that I have more than I deserve, like that net is gratitude. And if I think I deserve, I guess the opposite is resentment or something like that, If I think I deserve what I've got, I'm broken even. There's no room for gratitude yet. If I feel like there's a gift, whether it's time, whether it's material abundance, whether it's the blossoms on the red buds that Catherine's going to preach on later today, if I realize something came to me that I didn't go out and get for myself, that's gratitude, that excess. And it can happen anywhere, and it can also be absorbed anywhere by my resentment and my... Sorry, go ahead.
This was not actually about gratitude, but it immediately came to mind when, in the beginning, thinking about the COVID pandemic and how the first reaction was buy toilet paper and paper towels and corner the market on antiseptic materials. So none of these things were available, but you would see people in the grocery store with baskets full of toilet paper.
And there would have been enough if we had just gotten the same amount that we usually get, right? Right? Yes, exactly. I think that's a great, and that instinct of something terrible is happening, let me grab what I can, right? Because what if there's not, I'm going to get mine. And then that's what created the shortage.
That's what happens when they predict bad weather here. Everybody goes to the store.
As I look around this room, many of us are of a similar age, and we are children and grandchildren of people who grew up in the Depression era, who hoarded things because they weren't sure that anything would be available at all. I think somewhat differently from the toilet paper epidemic, but along the same lines. And as a result of that, to the point of where we are now in the world of I don't want anything else, we all inherited parents' and grandparents' china and parents' and grandparents' furniture and that sort of thing. And somewhere along the line, might have gotten one or two things of our own. And now our children want nothing because they're grown, they have their own, and so we're sort of the stopping point for multiple generations worth of material goods. And so there's this, I don't know if it's a new dilemma or not, but nevertheless it is one heck of a dilemma of what do we do with things we didn't get of our own, but they are our own, so where do we go from here?
Yeah, and I think she starts off with the grandmother story about the socks, and I think there's a really interesting piece of that kind of generational heritage about what happened and wherever you are in the generational lineup of how far back were the Depression folks, and then the next, and the story that she tells about her grandmother is a story born of somebody of that generation. And yes, there was some hoarding, to use your word, but there was also a frugality that led to, well, I don't need 7 bags, I only need 1 if I just rinse it out and reuse it, right? Or I can, so I think there's still an internal, people responded to that moment with different attitudes, to state the obvious, right?
A combination of the hoarding and frugality.
Right, yeah, so, and that shows up in a lot of different ways.
It's also a combination of things we've been talking about to me, too. I'm thinking about when Dad died, and he simplified his life a lot, but there's all these questions of, what are the things that convey something important to me. If every generation keeps everything from the last generation, oh my goodness, think about the snowball of stuffocation that we would, and I think that's what younger generations say, Mom, Dad, I can't keep all the stuff. So for me, the one thing that ended up being a real grace was like keeping Dad's old carpenter bench that was in the kitchen as a chopping block, but now I'm using it as a carpenter. So that feels like it starts to get at what we're talking about. How do I not make the God of the stuff like, if you let go of that old dresser that your grandmother sent you, you're a bad child, and make it a burden, versus, I get that. We're material creatures, and physical things can convey something to us and remind us of a memory. And so some balance in that, I think, is what she's
and I think the other move that she makes after gratitude is this move towards generosity. And we told you last week, if you were here, she lives in a communal living house with multiple families. And they have a house rule, which is that if you come to the house, you don't leave empty-handed. And she's like, great, you can have some of the leftovers from dinner. Here's the Tupperware that I might write my name on the bottom of and kind of want back. And somebody else, another housemate that she has is like, here's my favorite book that's marked up and she's like, well, don't give them that. Like that's, so there's this difference, right? I mean, again, she's very candid about her own struggles. And I think about our own experience with the generational handoff. My dad's sitting over in the corner, but when Mom died, she had all this jewelry, right? And my sister and I went through the things and we picked what we wanted and we went back and there was still more. And there was still more. And then we invited her friends over. And so what that means is that, like, this morning, I'm wearing a pendant of my mother's. And it's very likely that I will walk out into the world and see somebody else wearing something of hers. And it's the best story that I have about generosity, and it's not deserved for me. It's not like, oh, you guys are so great. It's because there was so much. a lot of costume jewelry. But there's this sense of, like, her description of the joy that ultimately comes from the giving away of the things. That's the closest I've ever gotten to feeling that, of like, oh, right? And because there was more than enough, I got to pick the things, the bench or the thing, and then the rest of it went to other people. So the people who need your socks, who are going to be thrilled on Sunday morning when they get your sock, right? That when we can remember the other side of the relationship of that, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Yeah, Heather, and then we probably need to...
Then let's move to the other one, yeah.
Move our other...
Okay, real quick. Sorry to be left heavy on this room side for questions and comments. But anyway, I'm actually working through a gratitude book, which has been helpful because what I love is I have stacks and stacks and stacks of books. And I found this book. I pulled it out the other day. So I've been going through it, and one of the things that has helped me that I try to do is every morning wake up and I do my prayers, but one of the things that it talks about in this book is just start simple sometimes, like thank you for my toes, my ankles, and go all the way up your body. And then, expand it to your house. And then, it is amazing. There's another one that had a list, like you do A through Z and you try to come up with something. So it's just, I don't know. I feel like it does help me get, and then you're like, wow, there is a lot to be grateful for. Because like sometimes we just spin out, and I'm definitely in the realms of 3 carts at Home Depot and the landscaping yesterday. So I'm still loading up.
So great. This is really helpful, and I'll leave you with this hack. If you want to go hear 20 fabulous minutes on gratitude, go watch the TED Talk of a monk named David Stendal Rast, Steindl, I think, Rast. And he's a monk who's done all this work on gratitude. And what he says is exactly what you say, Heather. He said, we think if I'm happy, I'll be grateful. We think if I get to the happy point of happiness, I'm like, oh, well, I'm grateful. He said, it's not like that. If I learn how to be grateful, I'll be happy. And this is a guy who grew up in Austria in the Second World War, who knew real persecution, who can say there is something, we don't have to be grateful for everything, but there is something in the next moment, even in the hardest, whether it's your next breath, there is something for which I can be grateful. And gratitude and happiness, I'm not sure there's any difference at all. As far as actual deep joy, deep happiness, it's like gratefulness. So anyway, thank you, Heather, for that. Yeah. David Stendal Rast TED Talk, go watch it. It's fabulous, fabulous.
All right, so sin
We're
number
moving
2.
on to the other model. Sam said these sound like car models. Avarice and acedia. Wouldn't you buy a Honda Acedia?
Yeah. So acedia, which is maybe the least familiar word. I mean, avarice has kind of we've got a little bit of vocabulary up there, but acedia is a very different word than we use, I think, in our kind of common everyday worlds. And it is, as she describes it, kind of this like, well, I don't even know how to get, it's just like, it's not really boredom, it's not fatigue, it's just she says a listlessness. And then she clarifies that doesn't mean you don't have a list. It's not about like, it's just a kind of like an apathy, just a dull, I think of it as like a dulled down feeling. I don't know if you have other images that are.
Yeah, malaise. And it comes out of monastic. It's interesting that these come out of the monastic practices, and the monks are looking around. We think monasticism is getting away from the human condition, but if you've ever met somebody who's experienced this life, it's like, no, it's the human condition in a pressure cooker. You bring your whole self into this community. So the monks are saying there's this thing that can take over the sister or the brother that's not at home, that's not at peace, that's can't make the next step into their life.
They call it the noonday demon, this kind of like midday, like, you don't have the, like, maybe you're a morning person, you kind of woke up like, okay, today's the day, or maybe, but there's this kind of like, there's this dip, and it might happen in a day, it might happen in a life, it might happen in a season, right, where there's this kind of like, and there's no there, I think we might say that, and if we're like psychologically analyzing it, it's a near cousin of depression. It's not really the same thing as depression, but there's this kind of like, I can't just will myself forward out of it, right? Again, I keep using the word dull. But where she takes us from this monastic idea and this kind of like malaise and whatever place is to distraction. So, which when I think about the way that I can scroll, that certainly has a little bit of listlessness and a dullness and an avoidance of living in the real world and a like, I've just kind of put this up between me and living, right? And it happens to be embodied in a 3x5 screen, but it's this. She takes it into the modern world and it does a deep examination of how we distract ourselves from really living.
And I wonder if it's, how many of us have, like, whether it's scrolling or something, been like, why did I spend the last 2 hours that way? Mm-hmm. Thinking about that. And often, I think there's some real wisdom around even the fact that we give so much of our attention to national events. There's some wisdom around reeling in also. My mind wants to solve problems. That's what it's made for. And there's a bunch of problems that it can't solve, including my sadness and my grief but my rational mind wants to spin, and boy, does the news feed know how to throw red meat to my mind and get it spinning. And guess what? I'm not solving anything. I'm just internalizing the anxiety and the anger and the fear and the stuff that it's running on. And so
cutting back over to wrath where we start.
Then we're back in wrath again. So there's something in this too that distraction isn't just benign, and we have these awarenesses that the parable again. I feel like it's me. Oh, you fool!
Oh, yeah.
You might not have more moment. Is that how you want to spend? Not like I don't want to be beat with that idea. I just want it to be an offering. Like there could be another way of paying attention. I think we know there is. We have those moments too where we're alive and we're awake to the world and friendship and beauty and all the things.
And one of the in the middle of this chapter, she like stops and there's these 2 sentences and she says, "I don't want to be a pinball. I want to be a plant." And when I think about so we've talked about acedia and this kind of malaise and this kind of dull down, but some of it is also like not ever landing, right? Like not settling in to do the meaningful work or to be present to somebody, but the ping-ponging, pinballing, or I'll think about this so I don't have to think about that, or I'm going to go run all these errands and stay busy all day. not necessarily what acedia always looked like in these settings, but there's a version of it of like I'm distracting myself. I'm not paying attention to the things that I might at the end of the day be glad I spent the day paying attention to my kids instead of like just marching us through, all the things. So she says, I don't want to be a pinball. I want to be a plant, which means if you're a plant, you're attentive, you're grounded, you're part of something, you're drawing from the earth and the sun and you're giving, so you're fully present. In that.
Yeah, yes, no pinballs. But the pinball's a good one.
Yeah.
If you're old enough to know what a pinball machine is.
Well,
I think we all are here.
they've come back around again.
Yeah,
They've
come back
come
around.
back around again, yeah.
Y'all are hating on the young people.
This is the problem, and again, it manifests in a lot of different ways, and she kind of walks us through that, and then she says, so how do we learn how to pay attention? And this chapter really, more so than certainly so far, and certainly than some of the others, she really leans into the gifts of church. So we talked a little bit last week about how she's trying to kind of offer these things as like, this might be helpful to you whether you're churchy or not, or whether you're Christian or not, right? But what she talks about having these trellises, these kind of posts upon which you grow, right? So it's a guide, like if you want the plant to grow here, you put it next to a trellis and then it will train up on that trellis, right? And it'll take the shape of that, right? So she talks about these trellises, and the trellises that she offers, in many respects, come from church practice. Maybe you don't go to church daily, but the daily practice of prayer, the daily practice of sacred reading, which she does not limit to the Bible. So there's a way of reading something attentively with faithfulness to glean its wisdom. Again, whether it's the Bible or not, those of you who listen to Harry Potter is a Sacred Text podcast, I highly recommend. Chapter by chapter, Harry Potter, read the way you would read the Bible, is fascinating. And she talks about reading some of her favorite books. Like, why is this book that I'm drawn to? It's fiction, but when you read it attentively and the characters reveal something and there's a bit of wisdom there. And it's just, so that's a practice that might not be as limited as we think. And then Sabbath. We talked a minute ago about, Nancy, you said the word you used to describe the feeling was of liberation. And she talks about the liberation of a Sabbath practice, which we think of like, well, it's the day you're not supposed to do all these things. But it gives you tremendous freedom and the liberation that comes from rest. And a little bit of structure can be freeing. And then more weekly rhythms, liturgy and church, and yearly rhythms of seasons and our need to mark time. One of the things that I love about the church calendar, not just that I love anything color-coded, but this like sense of like whether I'm feeling particularly Lenten or Lenten-y or Lentish right now, Lent feelings are a part of living in the world. So I may not always line up with the church calendar, right? Like it may be Advent and I'm not feeling particularly Advent-y, but guess what? Patience and waiting and prophetic words need to come along sometime for me. I may feel Eastery today, but it's not Easter yet. But it just acknowledges that there's a time and a place for these different ways of living and being. And it's nice when it lines up, and Lent feels like Lent, but.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we're back at time. Mm-hmm. Time's not just running out, but actually inhabiting time and rhythms, whether it's every 7 days or every morning or every evening. These are gifts from the monastic tradition that don't seem like they would have been made for us, but of course they are. And I wish I'd brought either a prayer book or the order of service, but the prayer. Listen to the collect today, because I think it's really helpful. It talks about. It sounds grim in a way unless we're having this conversation. I can't remember if it's sins that assault the body and thoughts that assault the mind. I can't remember, but it felt to me, it acknowledged both I'm a body and I'm a thinker. And sometimes it's my spinning mind that gets in feedback loops that are unhealthy. Sometimes it's the way my body's moving through the world. I know I need to take a walk, not mull more over this issue. But sometimes I don't make my body do the thing. And I feel like there's wisdom in the tradition. There is wisdom in getting out of bed on a Sunday morning and coming to church and sitting down, even if you didn't get a thing out of the sermon when Scott preached. It's a thing to come and sit and sing and do all the things with other people that can't be reduced to the information you received. I learned this lesson from in Sunday school, or I heard this thing that was. It's so much more than that. The way that our bodies actually and our minds inhabit time.
Yes, and the practice and again, she's an Episcopalian, so the moving our bodies, the standing and rising and the kneeling, all of that matters, how we position ourselves, because we are physical creatures, and so we get cues based on all of those things. She says somewhere else, it's not here where she's talking about church so much, but in another chapter, maybe even in the avarice chapter, she talks about church as a zoom out function for her, that it helps her remember how big the world is and how big time is and how big God is. And that when she gets stuck here with my life and my problems and my list and my things, and in the avarice chapter, my stuff, and that one of the things that happens for her in church, whoever's preaching, whatever the hymns are, however beautiful the choir, is there's this oh right, bigger story, right? She just lifts up into this, gets the wide angle zoom impact of oh right, more of the world is going on than my little piece. So the last piece, toward the end of this, after she's kind of laid out these different things, these different tools that we might learn from church and apply them to our lives, she talks about a rule of life, again, leaning on this monastic tradition. Somebody over there in the corner that I know who wrote a lot about the Benedictine practice, but we actually all are living a rule of life, whether we've called it that or not. We have patterns, we have priorities, we have things we do every day, sacred or not sacred, right? I have a rule of life. I get up at about this time most days. I do these things. I go these places. I think these thoughts, But if we're intentional about the rule of life, then like a trellis, we can reshape. We can be intentional. We can grow. We can move ourselves into. Well, maybe my rule of life doesn't need to be check my phone first thing before I get out of bed. That's a rule of life. Not a great one. So what could I replace that activity? So the invitation then to kind of think about what are our patterns and rules.
I'd love to hear people to ask if you think you have one. So another thing I'd drop in there as we think about what your rule might be. Rule is in with a pattern that makes you whole. I heard someone say one time, pray as you can, not as you should. Mm-hmm. Pray as you can, not as you should. I'm looking at Katie. John Owen is not going to pray like Paul McLean. He's teaching a mystery. We are different. We're related in the way we are in the world, but we have different things and different routines that we know we need in our life to be the best, fullest version of ourselves. Do you have anything?
And then just to say, this particular moment, in this particular set of the conversation, to help us pay attention.
Yes.
A rule of life that helps you pay attention to the things you want to be paying attention to.
Yeah, you end up. What is it for y'all?
Yoga for me every single morning. I've been doing it for 40 years.
Yeah, yoga. Yeah. More and more people are in their bodies.
The practice of meditation retrains your mind to live in the moment. It's very difficult to make yourself do it.
Yep.
And also, every morning I'll say something like, thank you for this day, help me to relish it, and help me to live in the moment, because that is a hard thing to do.
She mentioned some things that, neuroscience is telling us things that the monks in the 2nd century knew, but they can measure how different practices can start to rewire our minds in a healthy way. My spiritual director used to quote somebody else who said, our minds are Teflon to the bad. Sorry, they are Velcro to the bad and Teflon to the good. because we were trying not to get eaten out on the savannah, so I got to make sure, I got to be suspicious. But he said there are these ways of even, they started to measure like 12 to 15 seconds of gratitude. Like these practices of like saying, I'm going to stop and I'm for 12 seconds thinking, I'm glad for that, can actually they measurably begin to retrain these reptilian brains just a little bit. What you're describing. Any other things that maybe even...
And I think as several of you have said, like it's hard. Yeah. So, right. Again, the reason we have to keep showing up for church week after week is because one week is not, none of us are like one and done. Like, it's not that you're faulty because it's hard for you to meditate. It's that it's hard, right? So all the more we have to keep kind of at it. We need each other. We need to practice. We need to come back every Sunday. That's human. So.
Yeah. Got another one, Mark?
For some reason, I always pay attention every day to trees, the trees in my life. Mostly, I'm grateful for them, like that gorgeous tree in bloom out there. The blooms might not be there tomorrow because it's going to rain. A lot of times I'm afraid of them, but they are part of this world and just one of the things I pay close attention to.
That's great. Mary Oliver said, attention is the beginning of devotion. Attention is the beginning of devotion, and there's a certain kind of awe and devotion if we really pause to pay attention to just a tree.
And I think, too, so drawing on all our favorite, so Annie Dillard says, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. So on any given day, I'm like, oh, well, these are the choices that I made today. But tomorrow, but actually every day, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. So if you spend your days looking at trees, you'll spend your life looking at trees. If you spend your day doing a little yoga, you'll spend your life starting with yoga. So again, how we spend our days that's all we've got. All we've got are just a string of days. So how we spend them is the rule of our life. Amen.
It's about 10 past. Any closing thoughts? Don't buy the Honda Acedia. Upgrade to the Gratitude, even though it doesn't sound like a fast car or what.
Like a car at all.
No, the Acedia was a different one. Attention. This was helpful for me. Hope it was for y'all. I think that the genius of the book, and I do recommend it if you're interested, is the way she reframes some things. Updates them, but they do feel true to the ancient wisdom that was present in the tradition. Yeah, Ann, do you want?
So I've been listening to her book on Audible, and I really highly recommend listening to it because she reads it herself, and with her cool British accent, that's kind of nice. And there is such an endearing kind of quality about the vulnerability she shows. Oh my goodness, she tells terrible stories about herself, and you think, thank God somebody else did that awful thing.
Yeah, and her podcast is really good too. Her real mission on the podcast line, I think, is so crucial. She tries to bring people into the podcast that she disagrees with, and she doesn't debate. She tries to model how could I be in the presence of someone with whom I have this? They're not all people who she disagrees with. So lots are just wisdom and whatnot. But she really sees this project of empathy as so important to our world right now. That we are so at odds and so angry and so full of wrath. So she really models that too. And so I recommend her podcast. It's called
The Sacred.
The Sacred. The Sacred. Anyway, thanks for this, y'all. This is fun.
You.
Appreciate y'all. Go in peace.